Hello, Raven, and Happy New Year. I commented the other day on YouTube about a story that you read, the one where the person heard someone breathing when they were going to sleep, and I said that I would write you as I too have had this experience. Please bear with me as this happened a long time ago, and 'tis a lengthy one. My whole life so far has been one long paranormal experience, non-stop from my earliest memories, and I'm in my 50s now. Like a circle, I cannot tell you when it began. It's just my life. It's something to do with the blood. That's what they say in my part of the world anyway, that these things run in families. And it has certainly proved true in my case. Some call it a gift. I don't always think of it as such, especially when you're a kid that's so frightened you dare not even get up to pee in the night. I'm at a stage now in my life where I've overcome the fear and either get annoyed at it all or actively ignore the nonsense. I'm not even going to try to convince anyone that I'm telling the truth, because I know that I am. And that's enough for me. I don't need validation, and I'm too tired to massage the skeptics. I digress already, but only for a little backdrop to this particular occurrence. And like I said, I can't tell you when exactly the breather made its first appearance. I'm estimating prepubescence, around age 10 or 11. It coincides with the nighttime visits from what I now know to be a Hat Man, but I don't know if they're connected or separate entities. All I can tell you is that they exist. I'm going back to the early 1980s now. No internet, no information in the very small public library, beyond the story of Borley Rectory and Arthur C. Clarke's Strange World. No journals or magazines or TV programs on the paranormal. At least, not in my house. So, no. These people who insist the Hat Man is a phenomena born of creepypasta have got it wrong. Before I get to my experience of him, I will tell you a little of what was going on otherwise. I used to have frequent nightmares, and usually the same general theme: Darth Vader in various ways terrorizing me. Now, I was a Star Wars fan since my dad took me to the cinema to watch the very first movie when it was released. I think I was 7 or 8. Neither Darth Vader nor any other character upset me at the time, and it was surprising that it would be years later when these nightmares began. It was always the same kind of thing. It was his breathing. He would just stare and breathe, and I would be paralyzed with fear. Anyone who's had a night terror will understand the indescribable and irrational fear of that type of energy. I would often wake up to my bedclothes pulled up so high they were wrapped around my head, often suffocating, and they would be so tight. Like, not just up over my head, literally wrapped around it. One time they were tied around my throat, and I did panic a bit, because it took me a while to get free of them. I wore night dresses back then, and they would always be pulled up to my armpits too. I always felt like there was something in the room watching me after I woke up, a very uncomfortable and frightening thing. It would sometimes dissipate, and sometimes hang around, just a quietly menacing presence. I would be petrified, and unable to move at times. One night, I even tried to sleep in the built-in wardrobe just to feel secure and away from it. And strangely, I never mentioned these terrors to my parents. I was a considerate child, and I knew that they had their own worries, so it never occurred to me to add to them. I was also raised to be somewhat stoic and resilient, and so I didn't share problems easily. It wasn't apparent then, it's only in later life that I have wondered if this was the breather that I encountered later on, because the raspy way Darth would breathe was similar to what I would hear with my awake ears, years later. I had reached the age of 12 or 13 when I first remember the thing in the hat. My father liked to socialize regularly, but my mother hardly ever did. She didn't like alcohol and she was a little reserved in company, but I persuaded her to go one New Year's Eve to the club with Dad and enjoy herself. She didn't want to leave me in the house, but I convinced her that I was a big girl now and I would be fine, and the club was only at the bottom of our road, and I was responsible enough to come get them if I needed to. So, reluctantly, she went. It turns out that she enjoyed herself playing bingo and would accompany Dad more often from then on. That's when the thing in the hat would turn up, and I would regret trying to socialize my mother. That first night, I stayed up watching TV until it finished. Yes, I'm talking of the time when we had 3 channels, and they stopped broadcasting at midnight. I would have gone to bed earlier, but I kept getting a creepy feeling from outside the room, and I thought that I kept hearing noises on the stairs. But every time I checked, there was nothing to see. I eventually dragged myself up them to the sanctuary of my room and went to bed. I didn't want my mom's first night out to be spoiled by seeing me scared when she came home. I told her not to worry about me, hadn't I? I had to prove myself. I was dropping into the haze of sleep. I could see the light from the landing under my door. I heard my parents come home and my dad came up the stairs. I saw the shadow of his feet under my door, so I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I wanted to show that I was responsible enough to get myself to bed on time. But Dad didn't come into my room. I waited and waited, and then I peeped and saw him in the open doorway. I don't remember hearing the door open. He was in dark shadow. I couldn't see his features at all, and he seemed taller. I wondered why he had a hat on. Pretty sure he didn't go out with a hat on. The only hat he had that resembled that shape was his uniform hat. He was an ambulance man, and in those days, they wore a kind of peaked broad hat. I don't know what the style is called. Kind of like an old bus conductor's hat. And why would he wear that to go out in? My dad was a very smart man of his generation. Always wore a collar and a tie. Always fixed his hair even when staying in the house. This was not making sense. He just stood in the doorway, staring and not moving to the point where it creeped me out. My dad had never frightened me before, even when he was drunk. He was a happy drunk. I was about to pluck up the courage to ask what he was doing when I heard the dog downstairs get excited, and my mom and dad came home. Mom asked Dad to come check on me if he was going upstairs to the bathroom. FYI, I tried to get the dog to sleep in my room, but she absolutely would not stay. The next thing I remember, the dark shape was gone, and Dad came up the stairs, full of joy and beer and a good night out. There were more incidents like this to follow, and many others ones besides, some far more frightening. Darkness, bad luck, ill health, and hardship descended on our family. And I do see that as the turning point, but I want to tell you now more about the breather. So fast forward. I'm 25 years old. My mother had died not a year since, and my dad was ill in the hospital. I had traveled a very long way from one end of the country to the other to come home. It was late, and I was exhausted. The dog had passed not long after Mum, and I was alone in my old room in the cold, dark, empty house. I flopped into bed, and was nodding off when I heard his breathing. At first, I thought it was me, or maybe the defy as it rose and fell. I tried to rationalize it every way possible. I was stressed, I was tired, I was imagining it, etc. The breathing was timed with mine, but just a split second behind. It was really weird, but at that point I was more curious than afraid. I stopped my breath to reassure myself that I was going insane, but the other breathing continued. It was undeniable that it was not me. I was so tired and full of grief that I didn't feel the least bit afraid at that point. I was angry, and I shouted, "Shut the F up, I need to sleep." And it breathed once more and then stopped. It was not the end of it, though. My dad came home and I cared for him until he passed away, not 16 months after Mom. In that time, we had all kinds of stuff happening, and my dad always managed to find an explanation until one night the breather paid him a visit too. He still tried to rationalize it, but failed. I had a boyfriend stay over with me one night, and I hadn't told him about the breather. We were just settling down to sleep when it came by the side of the bed, with its raspy, labored, all too familiar old man type breathing, always timing its inhalations and exhalations with mine. It was bloody strange. I didn't say anything and tried to ignore it when the boyfriend said, "Can you hear that?" So, again, confirming to me that it wasn't all in my imagination or a stress response. I have puzzled over this phenomena for years and never found an answer as to what it was or why it was bothering me. I always wondered if it had a hand in my mother's death. She died in bed, age 54, of no known cause, though they spent 6 weeks trying to find one. She was very susceptible to spirits, and this is where I get it from, and my children too. We've always been pestered by them. Plenty more things happened in that house, and after Dad passed, things got really hairy. But I think I've rambled on for far too long already, so maybe I'll write again another time. Sorry this was so long-winded. I didn't think it made much sense without all the details. I really hope that someone out there can tell me what the heck the breather is, and if it's cursed us, how to break that. Because I do feel at times like I am haunted, and it affects my whole family regardless of where we live. Thank you for reading this, Raven, and for providing a space to share. God bless, and best of wishes for 2024. These are 4 experiences from my youth. Number 1, pranked. I was completely home alone one evening. I turned off the TV in my bedroom. It was a 90s style TV box. Anyway, I go to shower, and when I got out of the shower, the TV wouldn't turn back on. Did the power go off? No. All the lights are on, so the power isn't out. Maybe the TV's power cord got loose. I checked behind the TV. It wasn't just the power cord. It was also the cord to my VCR and cable box. All 3 cables had been disconnected. All 3. Did someone come home and try to play a prank on me? No. A quick tour of the house confirmed that I was home alone. And how would they have known that I was watching TV before I showered? Oh, my goodness. Had someone broken in to try to steal my TV? I don't think so. I hadn't noticed anything just moments ago. Plus, why would they want my ratty old TV when there's much nicer stuff in the house? Including a nicer TV in the living room. Another quick tour of the house, this time looking under the beds and in the closets. I even went into my parents' bathroom and peeked in the shower. Nothing. No one. Back in my room, I plugged all the cables back in, and with as much courage and calmness as I could muster, I said something like, "Okay, you got me. I didn't think that was funny. Please don't do that again." I went about my evening until my parents and sibling came back home. 2 disembodied voices. It was about 2 in the morning, and I had just hung up the phone with my girlfriend when I heard what I thought was muffled voices over white noise. Maybe a TV was on. My sibling, a room over, was scared of the dark and would usually put the TV on a sleep setting. I thought maybe they just forgot to do that. When I opened the bedroom door, the voices sounded lower, but the white noise sounded louder. and as if it were coming from the direction of my sibling's bedroom. I made my way to the bedroom, but when I put my ear up to the door, the noise now sounded like it was coming from the living room, at the front of the house. Maybe this was some sort of nighttime Doppler effect thing? I made my way to the living room, down a T-shaped hallway, and the noise gets louder. But as soon as I come to the front of the house that opens up into the living room, nothing. The silence. The noise is completely gone. 3. Did the dark just play a trick on me? I felt hands gently shake me awake right at my shoulder and chest. When I opened my eyes, I saw a figure in the shape of a man, but darker than the dark of my bedroom, kneeling at my bedside. The second I saw it, I knew that it was not a man, but I don't know how I knew that. And I knew that it didn't want to harm me, just wake me up. A second later, it stood up and took a step back and then completely vanished. I then sat up and looked around. And number 4, WTFH. Something startled me awake, and when it did, I was wide awake and afraid. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a plastic bag being ruffled at the doorway to my bedroom. I couldn't explain why that noise was so scary, but I was basically terrified when the noise moved from the door to the center of my bedroom, to the foot of my bed, and then to right next to my bed. I was panicking. What the freaking hell was going on? But I was so scared that I was frozen. The only thing I could move was my eyes. Suddenly the noise was gone, but I felt something straddle me. Like, literally there was this pressure on my hips and on my chest. And that's when I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to make myself sit up, but failed. I couldn't move. I then felt this odd wispy-like presence hover right above my mouth, almost like a feathered kiss to my lips. And then it was gone. To date, these have been the only paranormal experiences that I have encountered. Experience number 1 was the first one, and number 2 followed, but I don't remember which came next, whether it was number 3 or number 4. These all happened while I was in high school, so sometime between 1998 to 2002. Over 20 years ago now. Thanks for reading. Other than the haunted dorm, where Baby the kleptomaniac philodendron, if you remember those stories, stole its first balloon, I've only had one experience that some might consider a human ghost. I'm not going to give you the particulars of where the classroom was, as that's one of those truth is stranger than fiction things, but it was used as a lab for the storage and study of human skeletal elements. We would be in there all of an evening, studiously concentrating on learning to identify whole and fragmentary elements. One of our study techniques was to ask a neighbor to hand you a bone while your eyes were closed, and then practice identifying it by the feel. Because that was part of the final exam, and you just need to know them that well. But, occasionally, I would turn to a neighbor only to realize that no one was there. You know how it is when someone is beside you. You might be concentrating on something else, but you are aware of their presence. Glimpses out of the corner of your eye, that kind of thing. It was like that. So yes, I was distracted and completely absorbed by my studying. So it might just have been that, but I have a lot of university credit hours, and I took it very seriously. I have also been in a lot of rooms where human skeletal remains were stored and studied, some with thousands such individuals, and usually dimly lit with few if any living humans as company. But that was the only place I ever had that experience. No, most of the experiences I've had that one might call ghostly were of animals. I say experiences rather than ghosts because, while I don't have an immediate explanation that I find satisfactory, I'm not ruling out a natural cause, For example, the night after I had to put one of my cats to sleep, I felt him jump on the foot of the bed, stalk the length of my mattress, and curl up against my back. I was awake, but it might have been something hypnagogic. Likewise, the time I was driving before dawn when I saw a man cross the road ahead of me. He was being followed by a little white dog. It would pause to sniff something fascinating and then dash to catch up, or run off to a side to investigate something. But always it hurried back to the man's heels. But then I passed by the man and realized there was no dog. He was on a sidewalk with an empty, but for me, 4-lane road on one side, and an even more empty grocery store parking lot on the other. There was no place for a dog to hide, but it was gone. I was leaving work a couple of hours before dawn, following my usual schedule, and nothing like that had happened before or since. But maybe that was something hypnagogic too. Another time, something happened in the middle of the afternoon, so it had nothing to do with sleep or the lack thereof. I had 3 black cats, but one of them had been missing for several days. That afternoon, I had opened the back door and all 3 ran in. What a relief. I closed the door and went to check on the formerly missing kitty, and he was nowhere to be found. Sadly, 2 days later, the dog had dug his remains out from under the shed. He'd been dead for as long as he'd been missing. But maybe seeing him that last time was a trick of my brain. A replay of past events based on hopes and expectations. My sister's experience is harder to explain as it involves multiple witnesses and physical objects. She worked at a pachyderm house at a zoo. Again, not going to tell you where. Suffice to say, the building was the original facility from the bad old days, when elephants were chained and handled harshly. They have a new, much nicer building now, and my sister was hired expressly because she knew how to train an animal without making physical contact. There were no chains in the facility, and spaces where elephants were once kept had been repurposed for storage. But many times the keepers would hear the sound of chains dragging across the concrete. And sometimes the heavy scoop shovel, stored where once elephants had been pinned, would lift off of the wall and fly across the room with great force. And you'd best hope that you weren't in the way when that happened. Hey, Raven. I just wanted to say thank you for giving our stories a platform. I appreciate all that you do. Now, on to my experience. I'm not sure where to start this, but I will acknowledge that there are some religious/biblical references. I understand that this is not for everyone, and can even add an extra layer of skepticism for some. However, every bit of this is factual, and the timing of everything was too coincidental to not take a spiritual aspect into consideration. Now, on to the weird story that was, or is, my life. At the end of the 70s, my mother had gotten pregnant with me, and she was pushed to get married to my father. My mother was only 17 and my father 19. They rented a little 2-bedroom apartment in a tiny Midwestern farming town, and their relationship could be described as tumultuous and extremely violent, just as her childhood had been. By the time I was 3 years old, they had gone their separate ways, after my father tried to yeet my mom from this planet. I want to say yes, the story does say yeet, so I didn't just say that to censor something. By 4 years old, my mom moved us out of that apartment and in with my stepfather, who went on to adopt myself and my middle sister when I was 9. They are still married to this day. Years passed, and at 19 I found myself apartment hunting because I was having a child of my own. A few years and 2 apartments later, at 22, I signed a lease in the same apartment building that my parents had previously lived in before divorcing. I was aware that they had lived in the unit directly below mine, but was not yet aware of all the evil things that my biological father had done there. A few months into living there, I made friends with the neighbors below me, in my parents' old unit. I began to take my toddler down with me to visit, and she would color or watch TV while we chatted. Even though the neighbors didn't have kids, they went out of their way to make sure that my child had crayons, coloring books, juice, and teddygrams when we visited. She always seemed so content. Until one day. We had some children's song playing on the stereo, and my 2.5-year-old was fine just coloring at the coffee table near us while we talked. The next thing I know, she starts into the worst tantrum ever, up to that point. I kept asking what was wrong, but got no answer. She was completely inconsolable, and any attempt I made to touch her or get near her would result in her doing anything to hurt me. She would hit, kick, bite, claw, and just scream bloody murder. Thankfully, the neighbor guy slung her over his shoulder and carried her upstairs to our place. I asked him to lay her in her bed, and within 30 seconds of her body being in that bed, she went from complete hysterics to totally calm. She asked what had happened. She said that she was hungry and tired. I asked over and over again what had just happened, but she would only say, "I don't know." It's like she had no recollection of the situation at all. Life went on, and of course, I was puzzled by it. But I chalked it up to her just being a tired toddler. We continued to visit the neighbors, and things were fine once again. Unfortunately, that only lasted about 2 weeks. This is when the entire situation repeated. Only this time, she seemed to be extremely strong, and was able to not only scratch the hell out of my chest, but also yanked a chunk of my hair out. She was never aggressive or violent towards anyone but me during these fits, and she was never aggressive towards me before or after them. Not even 48 hours after the second occurrence, and without having discussed this with anyone, my mom shows up on my doorstep with her Bible. She told me that she was awakened in the middle of the night and was told by a voice to get to her Bible. She says that she picked it up and was shown the book of Matthew, verses 44 and 45. Her interpretation of these verses apparently prompted her to come over and to warn me not to enter the downstairs apartment. I was so caught off guard and my heart started racing. I asked, why? She informed me that my biological father had done some type of evil seance involving me, and he had burned her Bible in the process. She said that according to the Bible, if someone does evil in a dwelling and the next of kin later returns, demons will attach to them, and bring along 7 other demons. My mind was absolutely blown, because I had not discussed the situation, or that I had even made friends with those neighbors. I truly believed that my kid was just overly tired, hangry, or both. After thinking about the smaller details of the situation, things like the loss of memory, immediate extreme shift in mood, and suddenly exhaustion, I honestly have to question whether I witnessed my child being possessed and then released once those entities had made their way into my home, where they could access me. Within weeks of all of this happening, the neighbors moved away, and no one moved in the rest of my lease, about 4 months. My life also took a downhill spiral after this. I lost my job, I lost my car, I was forced to drop out of college with only 3 credits needed to get my degree. I eventually got evicted, and about 8 months after everything happened to my baby, I found out that her daddy had hurt her in a way that no one should have to experience, let alone a child, during that weekend's visitation. Even though I reported it, and she did too, nothing came of it, except he no longer gets to be around her. I swear my whole life fell apart. I'm now in my mid-40s and can still feel the attachment. I know that it's still here. I just try to ignore its presence. It's been with me no matter where I move. Not only can I feel it, but it sometimes messes with me. Like when I'm standing across the room from the kitchen trash can, but somehow it still opens and closes 3 times. I've knocked on the bathroom door and been told, "I'm busy," even though I'm home alone. I've learned to live with it. I always have a hard time believing that people could hear the voice of God, let alone my mom, until this all occurred. I can't explain away how my mom would have any clue about what we had seen. I was living 20 miles away and was also very low contact with my family. We have no friends in common. The town has a population of only 254 people, none of whom I knew prior to meeting the neighbors. There was just no other possible way for her to have known. I've wrestled with social and general anxiety for much of my life. A persistent undercurrent that, while not incapacitating, casts shadows on my confidence. My ability to navigate social realms and find self-assurance owes much to my mother's caring nature, pushing me consistently beyond my comfort zone. A few years back, freshly out of college, I embarked on the tumultuous journey into the professional world, a transition that proved to be more nerve-wracking than anticipated. My initial job experience was far from ideal. While I won't name the company, as I bear no animosity towards my manager, who navigated the same turbulent waters, the management and working conditions left much to be desired. This job thrust me into socially challenging situations, especially in the realm of sales, exacerbating my anxiety. Frustrated and seeking relief, I turned to my medical provider, who suggested experimenting with various anxiety medications. Unfortunately, none provided the desired alleviation, though they also didn't entail negative consequences, until I encountered what I now refer to as the demon pills. Now, it's crucial to understand another facet of my experiences: my history of recurring nightmares and occasional episodes of sleep paralysis. These occurrences were potent enough to seep into my waking reality. I vividly recall a night when I felt an ominous tug on my hand hanging off of the bed. Introducing the quote-unquote demon pills only intensified matters. Initially, I faced vague, unsettling dreams that disrupted my sleep. However, the situation escalated dramatically when the demonic figure from my dream began to materialize in my waking world. The first encounter was chilling. I woke up facing the wall, and on it I perceived a black figure, fixated on me. The fear was paralyzing, beyond the typical sensation of sleep paralysis. Over time, these dreams morphed into increasingly complex scenarios. I found myself in what I termed the hell bedroom, an indistinct space where I struggled to differentiate between my actual bed and this nightmarish realm. A persistent feeling of being stalked permeated these dreams, heightening my anxiety. One particularly unsettling night, I transitioned from the hell bedroom to a dream of playing basketball with my friends. The abrupt shift, coupled with my friends expressing concern for my well-being, created a surreal narrative. It was as if the demon orchestrated false hope, only to plunge me back into its nightmarish clutches. In another harrowing dream, I found myself surrounded by family, confessing the ordeal to them and seeking help. Strangely, I believed that I was genuinely sharing my experiences and receiving support. It seemed as though the demon wanted me to cling to false hope, only to shatter it, intensifying my fear. As you can imagine, the cycle continued, and my grip on reality blurred. I developed a coping mechanism. I would call my dog into the room, and if he responded, I knew I was in reality. Yet the demon transcended dreams, appearing while I was awake. I distinctly remember a night when I believed I had woken up. My dog was in the corner of my eye, but the demon sat at the edge of my bed, a three-dimensional and menacing presence. Eventually, I decided to discontinue the medication, and things gradually improved. While I still contend with intense nightmares, the demon's influence has waned. Just last night, my girlfriend noted the terror in my sleep sounds, prompting me to ponder if these dreams have always been an intrinsic part of me, lurking beneath the surface. Despite the ongoing challenges, I find solace in the fact that, for now, the demon remains subdued. I was subcontracted at a funeral home for 30 years. It was a very old building, about 100 plus years old. I came in late at night to do the hair on 3 elderly women after I had finished work at my studio. I heard talking and thought that a funeral director was in the office, or perhaps the radio was left on. So I went to the office across from the room that I was to work in to let the funeral director know that I was there, or to turn off the radio as I was alone. But nothing. Upon entering the room that I was to work in with the 3 ladies, the talking then turned into people yelling at each other. They were unrelated. I was not scared, as this was not my first paranormal encounter. I asked if I could help, and they shouted back at me to stay out of it and to mind my own business. I did all of their hair without talking from that point on, as they continued yelling at each other over some event. Perhaps they didn't realize they were dead. It was very weird, and at no point did they try to harm me. I guess after working on the deceased for so long, I just got used to it. I actually have another funeral home story as well. I did the hair on a woman in her late 30s. She had died in a car accident. The story behind this tragedy was the night before the accident. Her husband woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. He woke his wife up to tell her that he had just dreamt that she had died, and that he was standing by her casket just looking at her. It seemed so real. In disbelief and confusion, she said, "I just had the same dream." The next day, they were driving in their car. The husband was driving, the wife was in the passenger seat, and their young child and dog were in the back seat. A truck hit them, and she was killed. The husband, child, and dog were unharmed. So that, my friends, was this week's collection of paranormal stories. Stories that are about paranormal happenings. I was gonna say something clever. I had an idea. It was there on the tip of my tongue. And then whenever I opened my mouth to talk, it flew away. It's like eating a butterfly. What is that metaphor I was going for? I don't even know anymore. I'm sorry. Anyways, yeah, paranormal stories. Terrifying stories about paranormal encounters. Creepy things that happen involving ghosts, hauntings, and I guess demons also count in this situation. Definitely some creepy stuff. And hopefully these were paranormal stories that you all enjoyed. I know that I did. I always enjoy a good paranormal story. Stories from subscribers, and one from Reddit in this case. From people that have experienced something weird, strange, and paranormal. What? Why am I talking in circles today? I don't know. Hopefully you all enjoyed this collection of stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you are feeling ever so bold, you can leave me a comment down below letting me know what you thought of these paranormal experiences. If you've ever had a paranormal experience, feel free to let me know as well. Just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to submit your story, or you can email it to me. I prefer the website, but I know some people would prefer email, so email does exist. My email addresses are astheravendreams@outlook or @gmail.com. I own both of them. I don't own any other ones, so if you send it to anything else, like Yahoo, Rocket, MSN, AOL, I won't get it. So don't do that. I don't know if half those even exist anymore. They probably do. You can also join Patreon membership or get early access to content like this, so long as it goes up early, which this is going up early, so you should get early access to it if you've joined. Did I mention subscribing already? I don't think I did, but I'm not going to go back and listen, so if I did already, well, just ignore this next few seconds. But if I didn't, and you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, also please do consider subscribing, as that does help tremendously. And super thanks. As a tip to the channel, never expected, always appreciated. I could go on and on about all the things you could do, but how about this? Let's stop this outro by saying what you should do is you should remember that you are loved. Remember that you are valid, and remember that you are important. You're the best you that you can be. Don't forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And please try to have a lovely day, okay? And until I see you again, my friend, much love, and sleep well.